Just to alert our sensitive viewers, this episode may contain a bit of coarse language.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christy Blumendahl.
And my name is Rocco Catroni, and we are the Disability Tangent Podcast.
Each episode, we talk about current issues affecting communities while supporting people with disabilities.
Through research, community connections, and resource sharing, we hope to invite everybody to challenge their perceptions of people with disabilities and promote a more inclusive world.
Defined by what the people actually want and not what others think they want.
Come join us on this journey.
Deana, we are very excited to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here. This has been the product of Sydney, our fellow. If some of you have listened to our Fabulous Fellows episode that recently came out, and Sydney really reached out and connected this because this was her a little bit passion project. And so we're excited to talk a little bit about language, a little bit about what it's like to be on both ends of healthcare, right? The giving and receiving ends of healthcare. And yeah, we're really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
Yeah, so to start, do you want to just tell us a little bit about where you are at now in your career and what is it that you are doing?
Sure. Yes. Thank you for having me. My name is Deana, and I am right now an assistant professor at Northern Illinois University in the College of Health and Human Sciences, specifically in the Department of Physical Therapy. So I am working with training new healthcare providers, new physical therapists, and then we are also trying to start a more robust interprofessional education piece to that. I'm going to be working with other departments trying to put together some more interprofessional activities with nursing, speech pathology, audiology, and across the college in general. That's what I'm doing now.
Wonderful.
And I'm a parent. I try to exercise and do all that stuff. So.
And the many thousands of hats
That's
we
right.
wear beyond that.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
There's a dog involved. All the stuff.
I know. If you're like me, the dog takes up like 90% of the time, and then the rest has to squeeze into 10.
Very needy.
Beautiful.
So I was going to jump right in and say, like, where did your passion for disability inclusivity come from, and how do you exemplify that in the work that you do now?
Sure. So I was a practicing physical therapist for a while before I had my kids. And one of the things that I was lucky to have was my own clinic. And we focus our own clinic a little bit differently than some other people. When you think about outpatient physical therapy, usually it's like people who've injured themselves, like sports medicine kind of things. And we did not do that. Our clinic was really more focused on people who had chronic illnesses. Was a wound care specialist, so looking more along people who had those kind of impairments. And I realized that even when I was working in hospitals and things like that, like we had a lot of people that came back to us, and we had a lot of people that had these lifelong conditions that they're supposed to get better in therapy. Like we were supposed to help them. And I'm going to say fix, and I'm putting it in quotes, but that's what rehab was supposed to do. That's what I was taught was my job, right? I'm going to help these people fix them, and they're not going to have to do this anymore. And that was not occurring at all. Something was disconnected in my brain from what I learned and what I was seeing in real life. And then we had quite a few patients, I'd say, in our clinic who I identified as disabled. And there were times when I knew that we were perhaps not providing them what they needed because we couldn't meet them. Like, I'm old, so the ADA came out and we didn't even really talk about it in PT school. And knowing that I would need to do accommodations for somebody was just not something I ever learned about. But clearly there were things that we were not doing in our clinic. And then I had a kid. I mean, I have two kids, one of whom is disabled. But with my daughter, navigating life as her parent was interesting and challenging, a lot of new things. And I thought at one point, I was like, this is hard for us. And I'm somebody who's lucky. I'm married, so I have a partner were both educated, we were financially stable, and I knew systems, right? I knew how to get the healthcare system. I should be able to talk to people in the education system, and I could not do it. We could not I was frustrated. And I thought, if this is hard for me, how is it for everybody else? And I felt like one of the biggest things I was having a hard time with was like the language around all of it. Like how I needed people to, so from a personal experience with my daughter, I needed people to respect her as she was, but also, yes, help her, but also respect that she had these things. And it was just like, it was impossible to do that. And then with my patients, it was like, I needed to help them get better or meet their functional gains, but also respecting that this is how they were. So there was just a huge disconnect for me. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't have the right thing. And so I honestly was looking for another way to talk about disability. And I like just did a search. I'm like, I got to go back to school. I got to figure something out. And I found the disability studies program at UIC. And I took a class at night that was called, I can't remember the exact name, but it had something about it, advocacy and empowerment. And I was like, ooh, that's ringing a bell for me, because that's what I felt like I was doing. And I just really liked it. I liked how they presented disability. It was very different than anything I had in PT school or saw in my years as a practitioner. And that's what kind of sent me down that path. And here I am. And so your second part was about like how it's continued or what I'm doing now. So I ended up getting my PhD in disability studies, and I bring that lens to what I teach with the students. So even if I'm teaching them like a therapeutic exercise class where you're thinking, I'm just teaching people like how to bend their legs, do a squat, whatever, there's a whole background that comes with that, right? Like, how are we thinking about why somebody has to even do this? Is this the right approach that we should have to it? Like, how are we talking about impairments, that kind of thing? So it comes through everything that I bring to them, trying to get them also to like critically think about, why do we approach a problem this way? And why do we only do something that's related to an individual person and their body versus looking at the environment and system around them, and what should we be doing there? So that's where I challenge, I think, my students to think a little bit. That was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that was fantastic. And I totally agree with you on that, where my undergraduate degree was in disability studies, and then going through the LEND fellowship as well. Yep. Seeing some of those systems outside of it, because if that environment is not created for success for the individual or individuals in general, that creates a whole host of complications. And I feel like sometimes as clinicians, you're trained to super hyper focus on what is happening with the individual and how do we meet quote unquote standards within there. And as you do more of this work and see it more in person, and I imagine you seeing that as a parent and a caregiver as well, you're like, hold on a second. If the environment held up its end of the bargain, we wouldn't even have to do a lot of these things.
Yeah, there's this one story of this woman that I interviewed for this other project a long time ago. And she was saying she went to her doctor. So she identified as disabled, had this chronic impairment. And she was telling her doctor, I have a PA, I have a personal assistant that comes, but only comes for this many hours. And she was falling. And she was falling because when she was transferring out of her bed or something, the person wasn't there. And the doctor's like, well, all I can do for you is get you back into rehab so you can work on your transfers. And then maybe we can try and get more personal assistant hours. And the person was like, but I really just need the increase in hours. I'm telling you what I need. My function is not changing. Like and even with more therapy, I've had so much therapy. That's not the issue. The issue is this is the support I need. And like that sits in my brain, because I don't think as therapists, we've figured out a way to think about how our role could shift to address that issue. Right. And I think it might also lead to something like, it's a different service then. Like maybe you don't need that many PT services. And then so that gets to the bigger issue of then you're not getting paid. And then what is like all of those things, right? That kind of upend some of the practice. But I don't know. That's a conundrum.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And are you making clinical decisions because you can or because you should, or what's going to be best practice in this particular situation might not match up with what's available?
Right.
Yeah. And are you building the practice to build the practice, or are you building the practice to help people that are coming in because they have a legitimate need for service? And that's the thing that I run into a lot, where I run into all sorts of these things a lot, where systems just don't make sense. Like, they won't pay me as a disabled person cash money, but they'll pay someone to come in and chop my vegetables for 17.25 an hour. If I
Right.
had the funds, I could choose who I wanted to come and chop vegetables for 17.25 an hour, or clean my house. I could pay someone to clean my house in 2 hours time for a much less money than they're paying someone to come into my house for 30 hours a week and clean my house. Like, there are many ways that the system doesn't support my needs, but I have to do what the system says I have to do in order to get my needs met. And none of it is sensible, and all of it is wasteful. And then they call me, as a human being, a drain on the society because I'm the person that has a need. They don't call the system a drain on the society because the system is nonsense. It's me as the human who has a physical challenge that is then the problem in this situation. And so I see where you're running up against this as a provider and saying, but how do I as a provider fit into this system and then also make adjustments? Yeah, it's really interesting for me because I'm on the often receiving end of this, where I'm like, this doesn't make sense for me, and I don't know how to address it on this end. Like, right now I have a rotator cuff injury, and okay, I have a rotator cuff injury. Am I going to go out and pitch slow pitch? No, never, not ever. So that's not a situation we need to fix. But what is a situation I need to fix is that I'm in some pain. How do I get out of pain but not worry about having to do this and do that and do the other things that are going to exhaust me in ways that make it impossible for me to get through the rest of my day? Because I also have chronic fatigue syndrome, and like, I can't spend 95% of my energy working on building up shoulder muscles and then not be able to function in any other space. Yeah.
Right. And that's super important too. So there's that idea of systems. Like, one of the things, which I will say, I think physical therapy is just starting, or not that they're just starting, because other people have looked at this, but they're thinking about like those social determinants of health. And so the big things that are around a person, and we're like starting to have conversations about that and what that means. So that, I think, is hopefully we'll have more of an entry point into some of those systems when we start actually really educating students about that and thinking about that. And then, to your point, thinking about your rotator cuff issue and knowing you have chronic fatigue syndrome, this idea of having providers that will be able to work with you how you need is so important. That's totally lacking. We know that a lot of people with disabilities, they go for like mental health services and they're turned away because they're like, it's your disability. No, I have some mental health needs. I need some treatment, but they just equate it to that. Or with you understanding what chronic fatigue syndrome is and how that will impact your rehab, right? So having these therapists that are like disability literate, or I think I've seen that called that, or being disability culturally competent. Competence, like, not a great word, but have that humility to be able to like really think about everything that's going on and understand what a person with the disability needs, how to talk to them. The whole thing is just, again, there's a big push for that in medicine and nursing. They've kind of been leading the charge. I think PT might have been a little bit behind that. I think also just based on the nature of what we do, we really only focused in bodies and making those impairments better. But I do think there's more talk and more interest and a more focus on that now. And it's not as weird as it was before. Like, when I started my PhD, I'm older and I went back to school for this. And so when I started it, finding people in PT that could be on like my committee that were willing to think about this in that way was really hard for me. I couldn't find people that were like, okay, yeah, we'll think about the social model of disability, right? Oh, I've heard of that even. So great. But now I'm happy to say there's way more people. And you're seeing articles and the student interest, also students with disabilities that are driving some of this is also encouraging, I think, to me. I see it.
And it's great to say, I really appreciate you saying where, okay, physical therapy is really starting to look at this, and we say like, oh, we're kind of behind. I feel like every professional and clinician I talk to, myself as being in the rehabilitation field and then being in behavior analysis and being in different views of that, I feel like every single one of us are saying, oh man, all of us were like 10, 15 years behind. So it's, in some ways it almost feels like, okay, we're not the only ones going through some of this push. And it always amazes me that as people working with individuals with disabilities, and many of us having disabilities ourselves, it's so interesting to me that now's the time that we start seeing more of this push for inclusivity. And we see those articles and those calls to action that seem to rotate every 5 years, where it's, we have to do something about this. Yeah. Now's the time. But now it actually seems like now is the time. Yeah. And people are actually doing things and pushing things forward, and policies are starting to shift. So it's really interesting. One thing I did kind of want to touch on along with that, you, along with Amanda Sharp, wrote an article about that, disability and physical therapy, complicated relationship and uncertain path forward. Can you tell us what prompted you to write that and just talk through that work a little bit?
Sure. So I mentioned I had a hard time finding committee members, but one of them was amazing. Celia Pichek, out of University of Texas, El Paso. She's retired, but she was like gung-ho on this with me, and it was delightful. And she connected me to Amanda because she was like, hey, there's one other person I've heard about that's interested in this. She's doing it. It's very, like, Amanda was looking at something very different than what I was doing, but it was in disability world. Amanda was looking at, she wanted to understand around like technical standards. So these standards that you have to meet as a student to matriculate and graduate through a program. And she was interested in how those might prevent a student with a disability from even applying to a program and that sort of thing. She had found some work from Lisa Meeks, who does a lot of that in medicine. This is what I mean when medicine's way ahead of us on that. They've already thought about technical standards, all that. So Amanda and I connected around, she was interested in that. And I was doing my own research around looking at physical therapy education programs. We're talking about those social determinants of health and including disability and how much they were getting out into the community with people with disabilities. And what was their involvement? Was it only in clinics? Were they doing pro bono work? Were they actually going to centers for independent living? That kind of thing. So we felt like the only two people thinking about this. And we both had read an article that Nancy Sharby and Nancy Rausch had written like 10 years, I think, before, telling therapists, hey, you got to think about the social model of disability, and we need to think about disability studies, and we need to think about different ways that this paradox of disability, of valuing disability while also working to maybe work on impairments, right? And there hadn't been a big push or like anything. It didn't seem like a lot had happened since that article was published, right? So we were like, all right, let's do it. Let's write the next one. And we just started jotting down ideas and it went back and forth. And it was nice too, because we were able to talk about the different models of disability, which was nice, updating also with that political relational model, and gave some direction to where maybe the field could go. And I do feel like, not that the article was the reason for any of this, because there were other people also doing this work at the same time, but it has been nice to see what's come after that. So the Physical Therapy Association, which is our big national association, and in one of the sections that we have these little catalyst groups, and we have a catalyst group that's called the Disability Justice Catalyst Group. And it's like a growing body of people. And it has been active at our conferences. It's been active at putting on webinars. It's gathering groups to do research. So there's like a whole group now that's doing a couple different things around mentorship. We have something else that we're looking more at education again, like how are educators talking about disability with their students? What does physical therapy even think disability is, right? It has been nice to see that come out and see where it's going. And again, the student involvement, we've made it a priority to be like, we want to have particularly disabled students, right? Guiding what's happening around that. So yeah, Amanda was great. I feel very grateful that I was connected to her, because she's been a great partner to write with, and she's pushing things. I'm going to participate in the summer. There's going to be a big access summit this summer where We're all going to talk about what accessibility looks like in PT education and how we can update some things, how we can establish some best practices and things like that. There's different ways this is moving. So thinking about the education space and who we're bringing in to our profession, so who will be qualified providers, right? And also then thinking about how we're training these students to be, like, again, disability literate, disability culturally competent. That's important. And then also just finding ways to amplify the disabled therapists that are out there already. What are they doing? And the people that are doing all of the work where they've been working with people with disabilities in these spaces and doing health promotion, all of that. Like, how do we make that more pronounced? And again, amplify it, essentially. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's amazing. And it's awesome that there's more like accessibility considerations associated with that. And that's something similar in some of the fields I've been floating in. One of the things that you do mention in that article too, and you brought up here, how people with disabilities are really the ones providing those services, and like actually having that lived experience in there. I mean, as I'm sure you've seen too many times, people without disabilities are the ones that are benefiting, quote unquote, from that work, getting that notoriety, but more importantly, how that affects the type of care that you can give and you can receive. Someone with similar lived experience to understand this is what this injury feels like and how it has affected my life and my mental health and the considerations around that. Given that this article was published in 2021, I know how the review process goes, so it probably happened even a year or two before that. Do you believe that there's still a case for pushing more students with disabilities and practitioners with disabilities to enter the field? And have you seen any changes that have allowed for that to occur even beyond the accessibility summit that you were talking about?
Yeah, one of the interesting things is there's no data. And that sounds so silly, and I feel like it sounds like such a researchy thing to say, but I think in that article we talked about how the House of Delegates, or they either passed it then or it just passed, but like they decided that people with disabilities were an underrepresented population in education. And Amanda and I were frustrated because this means we should be doing some changes. We should be doing things like we have to do work around it. And what they said was, we don't even have a starting point. We don't even know how many students with disabilities are in our programs. We don't know how many educators are disabled. We don't know how many therapists really are disabled. I think when they get that information, it comes from like the National Labor Bureau when they do employment surveys and things like that. Just having a understanding of who is in the profession was challenging. Like, I think some of that is now starting to be collected and it's being included in demographic data when they ask for it and things like that. But that has been I think a challenge, because it's hard to say something is a problem if you don't. We know it's a problem. We know it's a problem, but it's hard to say, prove here's the problem. That is really interesting. And like I said, there's more focus on that. So that's good. That's one step. And in terms of, yeah, I think there is more. Again, I don't know that we see, like, this will be something that has to be tracked long term to see if more students with disabilities are applying and things like that. But I've noticed, again, there's more focus on some of the professional conferences you go to, or just as an educator at my own university, I've noticed that a lot of the offerings from our Center for Teaching and Learning are framed around access. How can your students access your materials, either online or in person? How are you incorporating universal design into your stuff? That's also promising because it's going across everywhere. And then if you can start to bring those in, that benefits everybody and what have you. I do think there is more awareness. Whether that translates to action will remain to be seen. But I do know there are more people who are trying to do that. And what I like about it now, too, is I felt like there was a smaller group of us. Like when we started the Disability Justice Catalyst, there was a smaller number of us, and now it's growing. And so there's more people that are like getting their names out there and doing the work and stuff. And so it's fun to see that, I think, to watch all the different people that are, I don't want to say taking ownership of this, but thinking about it and trying to make a somewhat of a difference here.
I think that makes sense. And I see that as well, that it just seems like there's a lot more evidence. Like maybe there's not this provable data, but there's definitely the anecdotal kind of like, here, I see people that are trying to be in this space and trying to make it more accessible. And that might not be at the level that we want it to be, like deeper in the system where it's affecting policy and it's making these larger changes, but you definitely see it, yeah, in this one area. And there's this kind of hope that means that it will continue to grow, and that wave, like, right, crests and pours over into all of the other areas, I guess, is a thing for me. It's hard as a disabled person to be like, oh, right, but here I have to sit and wait and hope that it crests, though, because you're constantly like, oh my God, but I need it now. Like, I love the progress, but I also want all of the things. And so there's definitely this tension for me as, okay, yeah, that's great. And also I might have to move out of my building because the front entrance isn't accessible and I've just been prescribed a wheelchair. And then, so I have to spend thousands of dollars and uproot my life, and my building can opt in or opt out of giving me an accessible entrance. So it's okay. Yes, the conference I'm presenting at is being great about making things accessible. My home is not accessible. There are definitely these things where I need it on a systemic level. And so I love to see what's happening. I also want more. It's just this back and forth all the time in this direction. And I'm sure you feel that tension too as a parent, you know, of a daughter that has challenges. Like, yeah, I'm sure that feeling and that tension is present in your household as well, where you're like, oh yes, I see this, and also I want more for my child. And there's definitely probably that back and forth in your experience as well. And how do you think that informs?
Like, how often does she have to tell you that what you're doing isn't working for you? Like, how many times does she have to go educate an individuals? Like, she's educated, everybody in our family, her brother too, educated like the school about language, access needs, just any number of topics. And it's like, how many times do we have to do this? Or like, when I think about sometimes when I think about health disparities or some of the other things, it's like, how many more times do you have to hear that you forgot about disabled people when you did this, or that you didn't, like, that they have worse health outcomes? How many times do you have to hear this before we do the thing? I don't understand why this is still happening. So yeah, I get it. Or like at schools, like in college, some places they have you, if you're a disabled student, you have to go like every semester and get your accommodations verified again each semester. And then you got to present it to each individual teacher. And that's so much work. And if there's not a way we can just streamline this whole thing, they come in with it, they've got it. Just the whole 4 years, they're there. Just, it goes to every teacher they have. Isn't there a way we can do some of this differently? And I have to think that it's coming, because if I didn't, I would be probably very angry all the time. As I'm sure you might be as well.
No, and I feel like so many of those systems are. What's a good way to say this on the air? So, it does perpetuate that piece, and it puts so much of the onus of change on the individual with the disability to create that. And then if that person slips up or is tired or forgets one semester to hand in the thing, I don't know about your department, but if we do student reviews and we say, hey, you know, maybe we should make sure that this person is supported throughout that. How do we make out these other pieces of our program more supported in general? Because there's not the only student that's going to come through with this consideration. There's that time to try to put that effort in there, but then it's still placed on the person to say, well, you should have advocated for yourself. I never received that paper, so I can't do anything. Or they get an adjunct professor that just doesn't know that, you know, maybe you can figure it out within the core faculty, but then once you get to the folks that are coming in from the outside, it's an additional training, an additional piece, and there's just so much pushback and bad systems where I think universal design, not just from accessibility, I think there should be universal design in the note-taking systems that we're doing to say, hey, did you ask this person about this? I mean, we used to get that stuff in Epic all the time where it would click and say, oh, check in on these 3 things, and you can set yourself reminders for that, and that should just be inherent. Here's this person's accommodations. Oh, a little window pops up. Hey, make sure that you ask this person these 3 things before you start.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think bringing this back to healthcare too. It's interesting where they ask about if you need accommodations versus they just don't even, like, whatever. Our kids, we, to launch them, we try and make them like ready to live in the world. They have to schedule their own doctor appointments, that kind of stuff. And it's interesting where people, like the people scheduling the appointment, will ask, oh, do you have any kind of mobility issue that we need to think about? Because the room might be different. Maybe you need a high-low table, whatever. And where they don't. And again, I have one kid with a disability, my daughter, and my son doesn't, but they're both attuned to like when that's asked and when it's not. Like my son will get off the phone and he'll be like, they asked me if I needed a high-low table for my treatment to go see Dr. whatever his name is. It's like, that's good. Whereas they didn't ask my daughter who does need the high-low table. And so it's an interesting how that's being brought across systems. Also, because when I think of the data too, people are saying we need accessible healthcare equipment, right? I need a high-low table. I need an accessible mammogram. I need to have an accessible bathroom in your facility, all of these things. But if the doctor's offices don't ask if the person needs any of that stuff, then they're just like, but I don't know. No one said anything. I don't know. But you didn't ask. Like the question's not being asked. And like, it's very possible that someone has always said to them when they make their appointment, because they know, because they've been in the system for 20 years, they're like, okay, when I call this office, no matter what the office is, I have to tell them I use a wheelchair, right? So that they know, oh, and this is what I need. Please write this down in the note for when I come so that you're ready, kind of thing, right? But that's like a one-off. And then as a result, it doesn't do a big change. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's bringing that into where we get the big change.
And then you get jaded as well, right? Oh, this is always my responsibility. And even when I feel I said this the other day to my friend Gavin, that we mention him in every episode, but he's created this like customer service application that helps people to set up their accommodations before they go to a retail space. And it was just put into a hospital, right? The very first healthcare setting. And people are like weirdly mad about it because they're like, it's a healthcare setting. I shouldn't have to, they should by law be checking on my accommodations and already have that in the system. And so I shouldn't have to go through a third party, and I shouldn't have to do this. And like, I shouldn't. And also, yes, you shouldn't. You shouldn't have to ask for accommodation. You shouldn't have to tell them you have mobility challenges or that you have low vision or that you whatever. But also, you can't expect every receptionist in the world to always remember to look out for you, right? You're also not the center of the universe. So I understand, yes, I should not be burdened with this. Also, I probably am going to be burdened with this. So if someone is creating something that helps me not be burdened, like maybe don't get mad at it. So there's like this back and forth, I think, that you get used to being the person who's the person that has the extra weight on you, and then you get really jaded about it. And I understand that because it feels really hard to live in this space, but also like it's my space to live in, right? Like I sometimes don't know how to go back and forth between these two things because I can see it from both sides. I have a family member who is a gynecologic surgeon, and I see like how much time and money and effort and like love and care and passion she puts into being a gynecologic surgeon, and that's a lot of work. I don't expect her to know everyone's needs every moment of every day. She is working so hard, and so I also don't want to try to burden her more with having to know everyone's needs all of the time. Does she believe that every person that has a uterus should also have access to exams and the accommodations that they need to have those exams? Yes, absolutely. Is that always going to be the case? No, it's not. And that's not okay. Like, we need to figure out that process and create a system where she doesn't ever have to turn anybody away.
Right.
So how do we fix that, I guess, is like the thing that I'm always running into. Like, how do we fix the system so that the system is never turning people away, and that it doesn't become this I'm against healthcare and healthcare is against me and we're fighting against one another, when what we should be doing is supporting one another. And I'm not saying you have the answer to that question. I would love if you did, but I don't know that You do.
I'm doing my best. I think part of it is what we teach people. I do think that's a big part of it. Like, there was that one article that came out that a lot of doctors didn't even know what their legal obligations were. So just straight up legal obligations, like things that you have to do. I want the beyond the ADA. I always think the ADA is like the lowest, and I always want more.
Yes.
Because I think everybody does, because it was never meant to be the definitive endpoint, right? It was always meant to be like, this is your baseline, but you can provide access in many ways. You should. And so that was one study that was done with doctors, and they didn't know their legal obligations. And then there's tons of stuff that they just, it's like where disability is taught, how it's taught, who teaches it, how it comes back through like their program. It just varies so widely. And so now there's like competencies out there, and the dentists have a whole curriculum around disability and working with people with disabilities. And it includes like those technical pieces, right? So how would you accommodate somebody who has really serious tone but has to get pap smear, right? So that's a big thing. You have to know how to do that, but you also have to know how to talk to them, right? What's disability etiquette? What words shouldn't you be using? Maybe you shouldn't be using. Just understanding what disability culture is, all of that stuff. That's at least all coming into, I think, more and more. There's a lot more things about this right now, more and more into the healthcare education spaces, similar to how it has been coming up when we think about how we talk about race with our students, or we talk about LGBTQ identities with our students and things like that. And I think before it used to be maybe in healthcare, it felt a little weird doing it around disability. I think, again, because when you think about what healthcare does in the medical model and all of that stuff, it made it maybe more challenging. But I think when disability has been, when we start to think about the social model, think about it as identity, it moves it out of that space. And then you don't have a choice but to think about it in this bigger context and picture. And so that's also a space where I see some change, that I do think that's occurring. I don't know that it's, again, consistent. I think in my own work, I found that it's like individual champions do the thing. And so then what happens when that person leaves? Well, who knows? But I do think there's a growing group of people that are recognizing it. And it's coming into more standards, it's coming into more competencies. And again, those are like baseline things I think you need. It's the ongoing work that will be important there.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love that point about, we might say the words, but there's not always the action behind them. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of organizations that we've contacted in the past, and when I say we, like collectively as humans, mm-hmm. where the organization will have that as a check mark saying, we did this one DEI training in February, and now it's November and nothing's happened, or there's no follow-up, or we use the word, look, we said autism acceptance and not awareness this time. We did the thing. Congratulations. And there's not that same push for what does that actually mean? What does that acceptance piece actually mean? What does that integration actually mean? And many times it's time and money. And those are things that organizations are strapped on, seemingly. At least that's how they describe it to people. Yeah. But what are those tiny things that we can do? Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of along that line about verbiage, what types of things we're doing, and I really appreciate that insight and that oversight of, what you're seeing as students are kind of shifting in and out of programs. More people are starting to get larger groups to make these changes. It's not just put on those individual heroes, because as you said before, when those heroes are gone, then the system kind of flops, which means the system sucked and that the intervention was the person, not the system itself. Yeah. When you hear some of those like common phrases or things like range of motion, strength deficit, weakness, limitation, deficiency, do you think there's other types of ways we can do that language component to try to be more inclusive? We've seen that kind of in my field and some of the research we do, that even just shifting that little word shifts the needle enough that people take that like 3-second pause of, oh, maybe I should say it this way, and you can fill all sorts of awesome things in there. But are there other ways you see this language shift that can be taught or that should be taught? What are some of your thoughts on that?
So again, coming back into like PT land, we think about impairments, and I've done a lot around helping my trying to help them separate impairments from disability. So they're not the same, in that you might measure somebody's range of motion for their elbow, and it might be at what a targeted quote norm is, but then we have a discussion about what's the norm? Who is the norm based off of? Should we be using it as a norm? And can the person, like, okay, so they can only bend their arm a little bit, but they can still comb their hair, they can feed themselves, they can do all these things. What should we focus on? So there's that, thinking about the word normal in general. Again, we've had a lot of discussions around that. And I think therapy in general has gotten away from using that and saying, oh, this person's not normal. The ranges aren't normal, right? It's moved to more functional, like functional limits, that kind of stuff, as opposed to within normal limits, right? So I think that's good. And like thinking about deficits or having decreased endurance and that kind of thing, those you could use like a weakness, like, oh, they have like a weakness when they get up, or they have a weakness in their legs that's impacting their ability to walk. It's really then how you tie that back to me to a function and what you're going to do with that person and what the person wants to do. Yes, we've had a lot of discussion. I've had a lot of discussion with my students about everybody can see your notes because they're in the chart. Like how you're documenting what the person says, how you're documenting what their deficits are, what your goals are, all that. They can see all that. And so we've had talks also about going towards strength-based language. And I think that's particularly important when you think about kids. So when therapists work in school systems or even outpatient clinics or wherever, because they're younger and they don't have their full identity yet. It could be a temporary impairment. It could be something that's going to be permanent and they're going to maybe grow into a disability identity. Your language, how you're talking to the parents, how you're putting it in paper, what they might read, is going to impact that. And if you're using all these words that are like below their peers or can't sit still or I don't know, whatever like sounds bad, that's going to impact. So is there a way you can maybe reframe that the person can do something with the correct amount of supports, where you're saying that perhaps they're not doing it as somebody who doesn't have an impairment, but you're identifying what the need is there, right? So that's important. The other thing we talk about, I think, a lot with students is, and this has been interesting, this idea of person first language versus identity first language. So in therapy, we're just starting to accept, I feel like, identity first language. So for the majority of papers I've had to submit, I have to do a little paragraph about what person first language is and what identity first language is and why I use both and why it's important. And I look forward to the day when I don't need to do that. Because I've had something come back to me where they rejected it and they were appalled that I used disabled person. And I was like, but I wrote with someone who identified as disabled, so why would I not do that? And I made it very clear in the paper. That's what we did. That's really interesting to me. And so with the students, it's reality, you're going to call the person by their name, but you should understand how they think about this because it impacts how they see themselves, how they're coming to rehab and what they want to get out of it. And you have to be respectful of that. I have also had conversations with my students, and this comes back to me as a parent as well, is thinking about euphemisms for disability. And I have to say those never sat right with me, being a parent of it. At the same point, I didn't want to initially, I'm going to say label, but have my daughter labeled as disabled. Part of that was for other reasons, like she was born before the ACA. There was a whole bunch of stuff that I was like, the permanent condition that could impact everything. But that being said, I like to despise the word special when they use that word. And I know that like special education is a thing and it's children with special healthcare needs. And I just look forward to when that's changed. But I also know that there are parents and people who use that language and they use like differently abled and things like that. And that's fine. Like I have stressed to my students that when you do things like that, if you do that continually, what it tells me is that perhaps, and there's some other articles and things like that around this, is that perhaps everything that you're doing for this person is extra, or you're just doing it out of the goodness of your heart. But like there are rules, laws, policies, all sorts of things that people with disabilities are owed these rights. They're owed accommodations. They're owed inclusion. It's not generous that my kid was in a classroom with her peers. That's her right. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like, but when you put special in front of that or a special need, I don't know. I have that to me is not great.
Yeah, words have power, and I think that's a thing that people just don't really comprehend. And words mean different things in different contexts. Like I recently was on a forum and someone was like, I said something about welfare seats and everybody got really mad at me. And they were talking about seats for the welfare of persons, like well-being, because they are British and they understand welfare in a term that, like in the US, plays. When you say welfare in the US, it means free, giveaway, someone who's needy, someone who's begging. It was very like a messed up kind of terminology where somehow we have turned the word welfare, like meaning your well-being, into something that means I steal stuff from you. And it was very, the whole conversation just made me icky, because I was like, okay, as a person who potentially receives some kind of assistance from other people, it just makes you feel kind of dirty and yucky about yourself when people are saying, oh, you need money? You're a horrible, 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 immoral person. And it's just, people have to consider that what they say matters. And the way that we address these things matters. And if you treat it as something that's extra, something that other people don't need, that you somehow do need because of some special circumstance, then it others you in these ways that make it sound like, oh, right, you get something that I don't get because you have a thing that I don't have. And it separates us, and it makes us seem like, right, we're not the same, when really all we want is sameness. All we want is equal access to the same stuff, right? We're not asking for extra stuff. We're asking for equal access to the same stuff. And that's what you're not getting, right? You're not getting equal access. You're not getting equal rights. And when you ask for equal, somehow it's special. It's extra. It's over the top. And that makes me so frustrated and angry that we've conflated equal access to something. I want something much more than what you have. And that's really upsetting to me. I feel like there's this article I read that someone wrote, and the article is 10 years old, and it was about like the experience that she had as a young person. But people would, she is a wheelchair user, and people would come up to her as a young woman, as a child, and put their hand on her shoulder and say, I'll pray for you. And the understanding that came from I'll pray for you, and she would be like, why? As a young kid, why? There was no understanding that she was different or wrong or whatever, but she developed the idea that she was broken, that God needed to fix her through the power of prayer, because people kept coming up and saying that they were going to pray for healing. But no, there's no, my legs don't happen to be functional. No amount of prayer ever fixed that problem for her. And so it was just like, it just created a complex. It just created ableism that was internalized and probably external. Yeah. So why use those words? Why make that problem for like this huge amount of people? Like a fifth of the population now has this complex, this conflict, this, Sorry, that was a very big rant.
Too.
Yeah.
I think because we've lived in our community for a while, and I'm relating back to a personal thing. Like I haven't, as a parent, when that would happen, like people would address me, right? What's wrong with your kid? And sometimes she'd be in the stroller, I'd push her, I'm like, what's wrong with your kid? And I'd be like, what's wrong? And they would point out something, and I was like, I don't like, oh, please don't talk to me. I can't with this. This is my child, enough. And I think because we've been in our community for so long, and it's a smaller community, everybody knows us, we know everybody, it's a thing. I haven't had experiences like that in a while, and we had one, but every once in a while it's jarring. Or like when people come up and they speak to me, instead of her, even though it's very clear she and I have just been having a conversation, possibly a heated conversation because she is a teenager and has opinions. But they'll address me and I'm like, hello, she is right here. Feel free to speak to her. Or when they'll ask me again, as like she's an adult now. And they'll ask me again, what's wrong with her? Why is she in a wheelchair? And I'm just like, I don't even know why you think you should ask that, or who cares? Also, who cares? So it's very strange, and I can understand the laying of hands on somebody. I think that happened to her once, and she just started laughing at the person, which I was like, well, that's what happens. If you do something without asking, I think that's what happens. So anyway.
Oh, man.
I think some of those examples that we just brought up here, and Christy, to your point about othering people through that, and to your point about saying, if we say special, that automatically puts this person in a different category. One, I think maybe the term should just be specialized, because I guess technically that would be technically more correct.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have more training in that. Maybe just add the ED. Maybe SPED is specialized instead of special education. But with some of those, othering factors where it's well-intentioned, where someone feels like they need to do something, and in the smallest piece of their life, that's what they feel like that they can do. And I can understand that component of it. If that's the basis of it, though, and then saying, I was just doing this, or I just meant this piece. And regardless of your intention, this is the effect that this is having on here. And if enough people do that, it creates that subset and that othering associated with it, too.
Also, it goes back to your point earlier, Christy, about how many times you have to explain something, or how many times you have to, tell somebody, right? I don't know. There's that piece too, about all the education you have to do to tell somebody what your needs are, and having to do it over and over. And some of this stuff too, I mean, disabled people are in the world, they're living their lives, they're doing our things, they live in our communities, they're in our schools, they're everywhere. So it's like, I don't know, sometimes I'm like, read a book, or I don't know, just do a Google search about what correct terms are, something. I don't know. There's ample places to learn about intentions and support and all of that. Yeah. But I also recognize what you're saying, and I'm not perfect for many different topics. So it's all growing, and there has to be space to make mistakes and learn from them, though. That's sometimes I think what, as a parent, I've maybe found a little bit more is when we will share something, or this didn't go well and here's why. And there's a defensiveness to it. And I'm like, I just want to try to make it better also for the next kid that comes through here. So can you just listen to what I'm saying? It's not going to impact her. It's for the person behind her. So this doesn't happen. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. I feel
exactly.
is important.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem for me too, is when you see it and then you see it over and over, right? Like the intent, you might say, I see people who say, my intent was good, but then they don't learn when you say that wasn't helpful, they go to the next person and they do the same unhelpful thing. And then they're like, that wasn't helpful. And then they go to the next person and do the same unhelpful thing. So really, they're not trusting your voice when you say, that's hurting me. That's not helpful. Can you please change? And they don't change. Then I feel like it's just this sort of infantilization of persons with disabilities, right? You don't know what you're talking about. Clearly, I'm the person with expertise here, not your lived experience. And I know what's best in this situation. And I'm going to keep praying for you, even though you say you don't want me to pray for you, because I know that will help you, even though you don't know that it will help you. Like this stubbornness involved. Like I have family members that every time we're together, they'll be like, have you tried medical billing and coding? You can do that from home. And I'm like, that would really be useful for a person that has chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, no use of their dominant right hand. I like that. If you start listing off all the things that are wrong with me, no, that is absolutely not a thing that I would be good at, nor do I want to be good at it. But also, why are you trying to shove me into a job? That somehow is the solution, when I've told you there are reasons I'm not in a job. There are reasons, and I don't need you to keep telling me you know what would be great? This kind of job. Or maybe you need that kind of job. Like the answer to all of my problems is simply a job. And I'm like, even my own family can't seem to listen to where I am, adopt a different stance, and move forward with me. So I know that there are so many people in society that are just not ready to be like, I can accept that you as a disabled person know your body, know your limits, know where you can move and where you can't move, know what's working for you and what's not working, and be the expert in your life. And I can accept and love and care for that and just be there. And somehow I have to be okay on some level with that knowledge and work within that. And that's, I think, part of the big challenge for many of us, right? Not just disabled people, but, I'm also queer. I'm also a woman, right? I have that with other things as well, right? I know that there are many men who are not okay with my womanness. I know that there are many, many straight people or evangelicals who are not okay with queer. There are a lot of spaces where I have to navigate my right to exist and other people's inability to allow my expertise in this area. So I feel like that is a huge challenge. Yeah, we all are having to figure out how to navigate this pluralism and accept one another.
Mm-hmm. That idea of expertise is something I also talk about with my students a lot, is that for a lot of times therapists have been considered experts, right? We know disability, we know impairments. That was the start to that Nancy Charbier article that brought Amanda and I together, thinking about that. And it's, do we really know disability? Or how do we know it? We know it, I think, from one way where we try to fix it. And so I brought that up a lot across a lot of talks. We think, and that's actually a big thing about disability studies too, is like valuing the expertise that people with disabilities have and including them. If you're going to do a research project, be sure that they're included from the beginning so that you're getting all of that information and the study's designed to meet whatever they need. Or doing your intervention, bring it back into patient care. It's like listening. That's a good skill for across any patient you're going to work with, is listening to what they need. They're the expert in their experience. When you think about those terms like range of motion or strength deficit and this and that, like we as therapists might measure those things and record them as like objective measurements so that we can say if what we're doing is working from that lens for goals and whatever. But you cannot ignore that as a person, and they have expertise about that experience. And although, again, maybe they have full range of motion after their knee replacement surgery, they're telling you they can't get out of their car, they can't pick up their grandkid. Who cares? There's something else that is very important that needs to be addressed, thought of. What are you going to do? Like, how are we going to work with that person to do that? That's where I feel like also thinking about like how disability ties through all of our patients. It does, like how you can bring all of that knowledge into your work with everybody, whether or not they're claiming a disability. If they just have a temporary impairment, like after a surgery or something, that becomes very important, I feel like. And that brings me back to like why I got into the first place. I didn't feel like I had any of that context. You know what I mean? So your expertise was very good.
I love that point about the trying to especially challenge students and either future educators or members of your community to think that way as well. And the point you're saying, just functionally, cool, your data says, right, hey, look, we're trending upwards. And the person's like, that's awesome. But also, I'm still in excruciating pain, right, and I can't focus because of that. And if your provider's like, well, I mean, it seems like you're doing better anyway, so we're going to have to discharge because insurance won't accept this anymore now because we hit the metrics that they're looking for, I think is that thing that just keeps people into that loop when, you know, we've seen that personally too. Like someone's at the 50% mark and they're saying, no, this is good for me. This feels great. My chart might say I'm not making that progress, but my life has been exponentially affected positively by this work and I'm good and I can discharge myself because I am done. Yeah. And I think that's something that people then don't have the ability to, because then the provider will say, no, technically you haven't hit that. Why don't you come see me in 3 weeks? And you're like, do you know how much time and effort and money it takes me to get here? I'm good. We're good. Trust me. Yeah. I know my life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
What have you encountered, to the level that you feel comfortable answering this question? Have you encountered any of that tension either with students or other practitioners, and how have you navigated that if it does pop up when you bring up those topics?
Not as much with students. Again, I wonder if the students are, because they are a generation, these are 20-year-olds that I'm teaching, right? They have been in an educational space and in the world where I think people with disabilities are more included with them, right? School and everything, in a way that was different for me when I grew up.
At different
I don't,
contexts.
or even just, I was thinking about it. I was like, I can't remember having disabled students in my elementary school. I think they went to a separate school, which is weird. But I think that's different for this generation of students, like they're younger. So I haven't experienced it with them. They've been pretty open to thinking about person first, identity first. They just, I don't even know that it was like, when we talked about it, that it was a thing for them. They were just like, oh, okay. And again, really, it comes down to when you're, oh, they did have questions about labeling though. They're like, so would I label somebody as disabled? And I was like, that's an interesting question. Because for an insurance document or for school, or if they need a service, like they may be like, I need you to do this, or you might want to do that because it's going to get them a certain service they need. It's that balance thinking about it. But if we're saying it's an identity, you shouldn't, right? You shouldn't. I don't think I should label anybody. So there's a balance there with them. It was, so I would say the students actually almost had a more nuanced conversation than right or wrong, that kind of thing. But I have, like with practitioners, it's been more of a like, I will only say person with a disability. And so then it's the question of why. And they're like, because you shouldn't call somebody disabled. Well, why? And then as they think about it and they can't like answer, or they're like stumbling a little bit. Again, I think for maybe some practicing therapists or people who are older, they just maybe haven't thought about it in that way. The idea, again, out of physical therapy, because so much of what we do was like fixing, disability hasn't always been viewed as I'd say positive. And so for us, it's, you've got to put the person first, because saying they have a disability, it's a negative. And it's like, no, we're now thinking that it's just a part of them. It's not a positive or a negative. And or maybe a positive on some day, and maybe a negative on some day. I am not disabled, so I can't say that, but it's part of them. It's this identity piece to it. Like, you can say the word disability. You can say somebody has a disability. And so a lot of what I found in my research when I was doing my dissertation and stuff is there was a lot of focus on the word ability. I like to focus on ability. They didn't want to say the word disability. And I think, again, the people I was interviewing were a little bit older. And I think that's where that comes from. It's like they want to focus on the function, the ability they're doing. And I don't want to talk about the disability, even though that may be an integral part of that person's identity, especially if they were born with a impairment, right? If that's been their life the whole way, that may be a very important piece of them. And if you can't recognize that, it might impact your relationship with them. It also you might inadvertently say some things that they're going to take maybe a different way. If all you talk about is, oh, don't think about what you can't do, only think about this. And it's that person maybe has never thought about it as I can't do. They've just thought about this is how I do it. And so now you're putting it in a lens of they can't do something. And you didn't mean anything by that. You're just focusing on ability. So that's how I think I've talked about it with students or other practitioners and stuff like that. And again, like the thing I've said had to do with a lot of the articles I've written is there is like a little paragraph just explaining what it is. Because I think some of it is, I don't know that people in rehab would know that somebody would claim a disability identity sometimes, depending on where they practice, how long they practice, that kind of thing. But there is the education piece, I think, that's happening.
Yeah, I think it still feels that way for a lot of people, right? Like that it's somehow there's a negative connotation to it. Why would you want to have that label? And I think it's really hard for many of us to claim it and to have the disability pride, because there is a lot of internalized ableism and a lot of like challenges with it. I think for me, it's been a process of getting to the point where I can be able to take that on as a part of my identity, and that's said a lot about my journey. So I think I started out in a place where I didn't want to be disabled, and I had a lot of that for my own self. No, I don't want that. And now I'm to the point where, no, this is me. as much a part of me as any other identifier, and I feel like there's no reason that I need to be ashamed of that. And there's also no reason to be ashamed of things that I can't do, right? Oh, don't focus on what you can't do, as though that's somehow upsetting or terrible. Like, I can't climb Kilimanjaro. Neither can you, asshole. Like, what? Like that, neither of us are going to do that. It has nothing to do with my disability. You're not in that kind of shape. What the hell? No, I feel like it doesn't. Yeah, like I don't understand how that would define who I am in any way. Like that, there are things that are unsafe for me to attempt because of my mobility issues. Like that's okay. That's not a problem. I don't feel like putting any kind of like stating, oh no, I don't think that I should try to run a 5K. I might die. Like that is funny. That is not actually a thing that is going to hurt my feelings. I understand that curbs can be very dangerous for me. That is not something that I find like a statement of who I am as a human. I'm not morally defective because I fall down. I don't know. Sorry, that got really discombobulated at the end, but like see, even speaking can be very dangerous for Christy. It's fine. It's fine. We accept it. It's just a part of life. All right. Someone else talk because I'm having a really hard time. Oh gosh.
At least on this end, it didn't seem
Wow.
but I mean, this, I feel like also that's the point of this podcast, that there's this safe space and even modeling some of those pieces. And I think that's something that so throughout my own history, I've developmental and cognitive disabilities that make learning incredibly difficult for me, and retention and generalization mainly on that. And I think it's always so funny because whenever I say that, I don't know if funny is the word I would use. It is a humorous situation where people say, well, you have a PhD, so you must have figured it out. And it's like, well, yes, but also there's a huge workaround that takes a lot of effort to get there. And I might be able to do that so quickly at this point that you don't notice it. But I also tire easily. So someone can do that, and keep doing that for 8 hours a day, or be like, oh, I need the motivation for this. Oh, here it is, and be able to do it. And that's just not how it works. I have to wake up into it, or I just have that feeling. I have a super intense 2 or 3 hours. Yes, all right, I accomplished a thing, and then I'm shot the rest of the day because, the mental bandwidth and energy that has that in there, and the feelings of inadequacy associated with that, saying like, oh, but I need to keep going. And that's something I just never accepted as I was younger, and going through IEPs and 504 plans and just not trying to use those because none of my friends did. And when you're a kid, you're like, oh, this makes me special. This is great. And then you start seeing the social distancing that people have, or you see your friends as models, and that doesn't look like what you can do. And you create your own thoughts about that and your own othering, even if other people are saying that you don't have to do that. So I think in the ways that we can model that is so important, because for me, that didn't change until I was in Lend and contacted more people where it was, oh, it's okay to say that. And it's okay to say, hey, give me a second, I need to think about that. Or, you know what, hey, if I ask you a question again, it's not because I wasn't listening, it's because my brain literally did not catch whatever you said. And there's a excellent book series that Brandon Sanderson writes, and there's a character in there, his name's Teravagian, and every day he wakes up, he knows exactly what percentage of intelligence and workability he has.
Oh.
So he'll wake up, he'll be like, today's 100%, I can do anything and change the world. Or today's 20%, I'm surprised I know what socks are. And kind of using that with my family and with my students, saying, hey folks, I'm operating at about 40% capacity today. And even just something as small as that has changed the way people interact with me and the way that I interact with other people. And I see some of my students using that now. So that context coming into it. So I think, as a roundabout way to say, Christy, I think modeling that is so important, and seeing kind of the flub of it, because it's not this beautiful fluid thing that people might want you to be like.
Right.
Or for
Yeah.
us, I must to be like, it's messy and it's weird and sometimes it feels gross, but once you get there, it's, oh, okay, maybe this is fine. Maybe I am capable of things.
Yes, Christy's a genius, but it comes out in awkward spurts. You got to piece it together. Are you passionate about accessibility and inclusion, but don't know who to connect with? We welcome you to join the Global Accessibility and Inclusion Network, founded by the creators of the Disability Tangent podcast.
Our mission is simple: to connect communities to available resources and create a supportive network of individuals from all backgrounds. Join us as we unite disability advocates from around the world to share knowledge, collaborate on initiatives, and drive positive change.
Whether you're an experienced activist or just starting your journey, there's a place for you in our network. To learn more and become part of this powerful movement, check out the show notes for this episode and sign up today.
Together, let's make the world a more accessible and inclusive place for everyone.
Awesome.
I was thinking as you said that about my heart rate variability, because that's one of the tricks that I've learned as a chronic illness sufferer is that I measure my heart rate variability every morning. And for some reason, this is a measure that they're just discovering is helpful, that you measure your heart rate variability and it gives you a picture of, oh, if you're all over the place, then you aren't going to have as much energy. And if you're very stable, then you're going to have more energy. And people are like, are you sure it's not a placebo? And I'm like, no, it actually tells me ahead of time, you're going to have this many spoons to utilize for your day. And so I know when I wake up and it's not good, and it gives me a number 1 to 5, 5 out of 5 being great, 1 being, holy crap, that's a problem. And if I know that I'm at a 2, then I know don't do things, or save your energy for the thing that you really need to do, and then rest the rest of the time. And it gives me this understanding of like, hey, it's okay. And I feel like everybody should have maybe a measure where they can say, you know what, this is my capacity is only X. I can only deal with so much today. And you don't have to maybe measure your heart rate variability or have Rocco's, I'm at 80%, I'm at 40%, but like maybe even make your own measure and be like, you know what, I'm not operating at full capacity today. I've got a lot going on. There's stuff at home. I'm just tired. Whatever. There's no reason that we have to all, whether you're a disabled person or a non-disabled person, right? There are days when you just don't have it in you, and that's fine. Like, take a break. Let it be. Like, I don't know, maybe some people would disagree, but I don't think we're on the planet to just produce things. And if you don't produce things, then you're somehow a complete and utter failure as a human. So it's fine. If there's a day when you're not producing stuff, that's okay. You're still breathing air, burning calories. I'm sure there's something fine about just existing. Trees just exist. They're not like, what are birds doing? I don't know. They're part of the ecosystem. They must have a reason for existing. Do we know what it is? No. And it's fine. They're fine. We don't go around harassing birds like, get to it, eat something, fly. No, it's fine. They're fine. So why do we think that humans somehow have to be harassed into action? I don't get it. That was probably a really big tangent. Why am I
Welcome to the disability tangent.
We did it. That one was great.
I'm screaming at birds, telling them to fly. Oh my God. Welcome to my life.
Thank you for that space to, have us kind of talk through that for sure. And, kind of think about around that language component and identity in general, looking ahead in general for you, what are some of your hopes and aspirations for disability inclusive physical therapy practice, education, research, or even beyond that? What kind of changes would you like to see?
I think starting in education, I would like to see some curricular changes where we're incorporating some more of the disability models and some more disability studies principles in general across PT education program would be great. Thinking about being anti-ableist and the ways that we are encouraging students to be anti-racist and things like that, those link. So I just think it's a natural space for us to start thinking about that. I would like to see more natural inclusion of students with disabilities where it's not looked at like, oh, I gotta do these accommodations. So, and that might be something that develops over time because again, we don't even know how many students with disabilities are in our programs, the types of disabilities, there's going to be different accommodations and different needs, but just having and more openness to doing all of that. I look forward to that. And I think that's coming. So I think that's good. In terms of our practice, I have been thinking about this for a while, and I'm like, this idea of social determinants of health and thinking about those bigger interventions and thinking about some of those systems things. That is an area where I am really curious where we go with that, because I think our role, it will, as a PT, it'll have to look very different. When you're thinking about some of those bigger determinants and those bigger systems, you're impacting not just an individual, but you're thinking about all individuals. We're thinking about populations, right? And so that's very different than me going in and saying, I'm going to do exercises with this person, or I'm going to run a group exercise class. So it's going to look different. And I don't think we have a true idea of our role in that yet. So it's exciting to me. I think there might be a space where we can think about how we could be useful in terms of thinking about access to spaces, programming, financial services, that kind of thing. We've used our advocacy pretty well for doing a lot of individual one-on-one patient things, like when we have to call an insurance company or a doctor, that kind of stuff. I think therapists do want to help. We're good at that. We've also used our advocacy for getting different bills passed, like making sure that everybody who has gone through some kind of breast cancer experience has access to the aftercare things should they develop some kind of condition where their arm or leg swells up. That was 10 years in the making, got passed. People now are going to have access to wraps and supports and all sorts of things, which is great and huge. Around getting healthcare services, we do a lot of work around making sure that Medicare reimburses, right? That to me has always seemed a little bit selfish because it's us getting paid. How do we think about the bigger picture of healthcare access? Like, where do we use our voices to impact some of that? So those are spaces that I'm curious where we go, because I think it's very different than what therapists have done in the past. And it's like a different focus of practice. And for some people, they're like, but that's not what we do. That would be a social worker that would be thinking about that, or that's occupational therapy that thinks about that. But our vision is to impact the health of society and to help people move through like environments. So if you think about environments, not just like your physical environment, but like your social environment or your policy environment or laws and things like that, we can help people move through those, right? What do we do to facilitate movement through those? So I like I'm curious to see where we go with that and how we reconceptualize some of the things we can do. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I completely agree about it's I think I've seen people call that as cross-training. We'll use some of this in our work, and I think there is an aspect of that, but to your point, if the basis of what clinicians are doing is for that transition, and whatever that transition looks like as specific to the individuals as well, I think that already fits within our scope of practice and competence, because that's what we're supposed to do. We're not fixing, and we're not cars, right? We're not fixing this up and sending you out into the world.
Yeah, some of this I've argued, but we should have been doing this from the beginning. We just chose to focus on a body and spoke very clearly on some of our educational standards, like psychosocial aspects of disability. That's huge. We can do so many things around. So we just haven't done that. That's always been my argument. That's why I think we can move spaces.
Agreed. I think certification boards should get on that as a requirement to say, okay, we're going to be working with this population, learn and interact with the population, and not always in positions of power. Maybe we should do that. Yeah.
That's a huge one too. I would love to see, thinking about just our organizational setup and things like that. Just again, that more people are moving into these positions. And again, I think they are. It's just how we help facilitate that a little bit more quickly, maybe. I'm excited to see some of the changes that could it exist. Physical therapy is very white. There's just a lot of, I think, knowledge that maybe we don't have in our profession that I look forward to having it, again, being amplified. Not that it's not there, it's just not across our practice. So there's more spaces for us to learn. And part of our thing as being therapists, we're committed to lifelong learning. And so I think this is a space where we can really dive into, I think, hopefully.
Yeah, it's like diversity and inclusion shouldn't be a niche. It should be the standard.
Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I think just in interest of time, we're coming to the end in general. And I wanted to ask you as well, was there anything that you want people to know or anything that we haven't really covered today that you were hoping to, or anything you want to leave us with?
I feel like we talked about so much stuff. I think in this space, I think especially for PTs and maybe rehab and maybe medicine in general, is that I feel like sometimes there's a concern about being right or wrong, maybe being afraid to maybe try something out or engage with something because you don't want to be wrong. No one wants to be wrong ever. But like one thing I've learned as a parent and whatever is also you have to give people grace to screw up, because I've screwed up. And then I don't want to say fix it, but learn from it. And I think we all have to be okay with mistakes and learning as long as people are genuine in those efforts. And to be genuine in your efforts too, I think would be the only other thing I would say there. But that's about it. Because I feel like, especially thinking about disability, it's complicated for people. I think especially if they've been in rehab for a long time and things like that. And so maybe there's a hesitancy to think about some of these and engage with them. But I think people should be encouraged to do it. And I think that we have to recognize that we're all not going to be perfect right from the get-go. And that we should, as long as there's genuine efforts to learn, I think that should be embraced.
Yeah.
I love it. Put that on a mug.
Rocco would put everything on a mug or a t-shirt. I think he has a list of 18,000 t-shirt sayings, and I'm here for it. I really am.
A different one every podcast.
I know.
Have a different handle of his mug, have his t-shirt.
I have many tank tops that have great sayings on them, so I feel like that would be great. I would be down for it. I think we'll go with it. We'll have the Disability Tangent shop. We'll have so much merch. There will be like 18,000 different t-shirts to choose from. So it'll be awesome.
That's your production for the day. There you go.
See, that's...
You don't have to do anything else. You've done it. Fly, bird, fly! You flew. Oh my God.
Seriously, thanks for talking with us today and giving Christy and I space to work through those things as well and talk through those things with you. This was awesome. I really appreciated your insight and the conversations that we had today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I feel like I rambled, but thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no. From one rambler, I feel like, no, you didn't ramble at all. I thought you were very collected, but yeah, this was beautiful. And I so appreciate you and what you were working toward. And this has been lovely.
As hosts of the Disability Tangent podcast, we love hearing from our listeners. Your thoughts, feedback, and questions are what keep our podcast going and growing.
So if you've been inspired, moved, or even challenged by anything you've heard on our show, we want to hear from you. Share your stories, your insights, and your questions with us by emailing disabilitytangent@gmail.com.
Whether you're sharing a personal story, suggesting a topic for a future episode, or simply want to say hello, we're here and ready to listen.
So don't be shy. Drop us an email at disabilitytangent@gmail.com and let's keep the conversation going. Your voice matters, and we can't wait to hear from you.
That's all for today, folks. Until next time, remember to stay engaged, stay curious, and above all, stay connected. Thank you for listening.
Join us next time for a discussion with Stacy Ham from Will Rogers Airport in Oklahoma City. We'll be discussing ways that they are trying to do access right. We touch on the Hidden Disability Sunflower Lanyard program that they've adopted, adult changing table, and how they are looking to go beyond the standards of the ADA. Join us in hearing more about how this airport is trying to make the world a more accessible place. See you next time.